Right, welcome back, everybody. Today I have the Greer Kirshenbaum. We have the Nurture Revolution. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you because I actually was following you on Instagram for months before I realized you were putting out a book. And when I saw that you were putting out a book, I pre-ordered it right away because I love the content that you put out around nurturance and how that impacts the infant brain and how that impacts us as we grow into functional humans and adults. So
Yeah.
before we dive into some of the questions I have for you today, I'd love like a quick little synopsis of what got you into this body of work to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the origin was like my own personal experience. I was a very high needs baby. I needed constant contact and holding and only by certain people. And I was a very low need sleep baby. So I needed, lots of attention throughout the night as well. And my mom did meet my needs. My brother was very similar to me too. And it was always a narrative in our life. Like, you guys were like the worst babies. Other people would say that, not my mom. And
Yeah.
my parents are like, you never used your crib. Like, what is this? Like, you guys were a mystery. And nobody was talking about that stuff back then. But it was always part of my narrative. My mom, always, she was like, I'm still making up for my sleep from those years. And it was always part of us. And my mom's influence actually led me into the study of early life experience and how it shapes the brain. I was originally headed to do an MD, and to prepare, I started working in neuroscience labs. And that led me to an undergraduate degree in neuroscience, where I really honed in on how experience builds the brain. And I was just so taken in by the research. I continued on. I did a PhD in medical science and neuroscience, focusing on mental health and the genetics and experience that form our mental health or contribute to it.
Right.
And kept on loving the research. I continued. I did a postdoctoral fellowship at Columbia University, continuing to study how experiences shape the brain. And by the end, I really wanted to bring the information out into the world. I really wanted parents to understand this vast body of research that had emerged throughout my career. And a lot of people around me were having babies. And I could see that this information just had absolutely not gotten out into the world. So at that point, I wanted to write the book, but I trained as a birth and postpartum doula, and I've been practicing, for a little more than 8 years. And I also had my own baby. So
Yeah.
the book came at the right time to sort of cover everything I learned in my career, working with families as a doula, and also having a child myself.
Beautiful. I love that. I was a doula as well for many years. So I had the pleasure of attending plenty of births before I ever became pregnant. And I think it's really important for us as
Yes.
a society that we are introduced to that before we have children ourselves.
Yeah, it also starts to shape your brain, right? To
Yeah.
become more nurturing when you're around lots of, babies and parents. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to experience a high after attending a birth as if I had just done some sort of drug. So we're like the next 48 hours, be wandering around. Everything would be brighter. Everything would
Yes.
be more ecstatic. It was just so special to watch a human being come into the world.
Yes, it
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really looking forward to talking with you about this stuff today. I've got your book open. Thank you for sending this early copy. I've got a second one coming. And
Amazing.
I have it open to the myths because you've listed here 30 myths.
Mhm.
And as I was reading through them, it's so interesting how many of these are still so prevalent. And, we're making progress every generation. And I think
Yep.
that's something that I hear all of the time is the goal of each generation is just raise our kids a little bit better than we had it, right? For
Yep.
some of us, sounds like you had a really good start. But I want to talk about a few of these because they really do impact the way that we see and treat our infants, which are, just tiny little humans. And myth
Yeah.
number one is that infants don't remember anything. So experience in infancy doesn't really matter. And isn't that such a prevalent one today?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So many parents, this comes up in so many interactions with parents, right? That, elders, friends, doctors, all kinds of people are telling them this, right? Like, your baby's not going to remember anything. Let them cry. If you feel bad about it, it doesn't matter. Let them cry. Um, it's a sort of a blanket kind of, I'd say people, yeah, say it's like a reality, but it's a myth, right? It's like
Yeah.
kind of a blanket statement to just sort of sweep parents' feelings under the rug about
Mhm.
wanting to be close and nurture babies.
And you talk about the difference between implicit and explicit memory, and also the fact that, not all memory is us having like a visual recount of what happened. It's also a cellular and neurological memory as well. So, can you
Yeah.
talk about what kind of memory infants have from those first early 3 years and how that can show up?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's true. It's a really big misconception of memory, right? People are like, well, I don't remember being born. I don't remember what my crib was like, or I don't remember
Mhm.
eating my first food or my first step. So that means that babies don't have memory. But there's so many kinds of memory. So that's one type, generally kind of called autobiographical memory, like the how, what, when, who kind of memories. Like, I know when that happened, I know what it looked like, I remember it. Um, but implicit memory is is much different, right? It's sort of memory can be broadly defined as events that happen to us that change brain circuitry or change our neurology in a lasting way,
Right.
right? For a long period of time,
And when you
right?
say in a blasting way, you mean it's something that impacted us, sort of like a trauma or even an exciting event, right? Like this could be a positive thing as well.
Yes,
And it's so
absolutely.
impactful that it sets new foundations in the brain.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's always so important to remember the positive parts too,
Yeah.
right? Because that's kind of my message, right? Like let's give babies as many positive nurturing experiences as we can in those first 3 years because we are forming their implicit memory. And, as we grow, so much of our behavior, emotions, thoughts, relationships, all of these, like, really important parts of us, so much of our internal workings are coming from this implicit memory, this unconscious place in our minds. Um, some estimates are like 95% of our experience in the world comes
Wow.
from these unconscious places, right? So we're really forming very, very important parts of the mind.
Yeah, that's both wonderful and terrifying, and I think about
Yeah.
my own early experiences and how much I've struggled in relationship as a result, probably of those early years. But then I also think about my daughter and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's just so much pressure. And I think that's why a lot of times parents really don't like hearing this information, or when this kind of information is shared, it's often right away shut down and attacked as mom shaming or dad shaming, like I'm
Yep.
doing my best, because people are really defensive. And especially knowing that in the first 3 years is the most pivotal point when it's also the most stressful for parents, right? Like I'm thinking about Ben and I in our first year, even, our daughter's only 8 months, but we've had some really stressful moments between us in our relationship
Mhm.
because we have no sleep, we have no time for each other, we have a lot of help around us, and we are still struggling sometimes. And
Yeah.
so I can imagine that it's hard for parents to accept this, because it feels like a lot of pressure. But hopefully, through this interview, we can lighten the load a little bit mentally and give some really practical ways for this to be
Yeah.
possible for all families, because I don't want to believe that it's a privilege that only those who have wealth and nannies can afford
Mhm.
to provide this type of support and security to their children, even though to an extent, some of that is true, isn't it?
Yes and no. So I think, the research really shows us that it's the quality and not quantity necessarily
Right.
of a baby's relationship with at least one person in their
Okay.
life, right? And so that relationship with their primary person, or, other people, loving people in their life, that is protective, right? That is protective to grow the system. And so I do absolutely hear all of, the concerns people have about this, like that's too much pressure. I feel like I have to perform too much in these 3 years. I'm worried about it every second. And I think the biggest message I have, is once we learn about what babies do need, a lot of worry can fade away because sort of knowing these years matter. I think everyone does know they matter.
Yeah.
Um, that can create a lot of anxiety because it's like, what am I supposed to do? Like, there's not really a clear voice
Yeah.
helping us with that, right?
Mhm.
And so, I talk about ways that we can connect with our babies and nurture our babies. That doesn't mean that you're with them the whole day because so many of us do need to work and
Mhm.
have multiple caregivers and all that kind of stuff. Um, and it doesn't need to be intensive either,
Mhm.
right? Necessarily, right? Sleep is hard. Sleep,
Yeah.
depending on what kind of baby you have, that supporting sleep absolutely is hard.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, I think it is accessible to many families.
Mhm.
And it can free people from a lot of anxiety because you can, you understand what you do need to be concerned about and everything else that you can kind of forget about in a
Right.
lot of ways, right?
So what are those things? What are those things that we need to be concerned about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, because in these first 3 years, we're really growing the emotional brain of the baby, babies need us to be present with them,
Mhm.
right? For at least parts of the day.
Yeah. And when you
And
say present, you don't mean just in the same space. You mean like eye contact, interaction. I can feel my nervous system syncing with yours kind of presence.
exactly, emotionally present,
Yeah.
right? So I talk about I think the biggest umbrella ideas are having what I call a nurtured presence, which does mean putting down distractions, and being with your baby, right? Instead of doing, because we're so used to doing, um, just shifting. And this is like also not such a high pressure thing. It's sort of throughout your time you are with your baby, it's just shifting some of those minutes towards being connected with them and being present with them, right? And sort of hopefully being able to take a deep breath, regulate a little bit, and just focus your attention on your baby, right? And
Yeah.
just be present in that way, be really accepting and loving of them. So yeah, the other big, emotional piece is the acceptance of our baby's
Mhm.
emotions and stress, accepting them regardless of how much stress is in their body, regardless of what emotions they're having, right? So many of us, I absolutely had a lot of that, bed sharing, long-term breastfeeding care, but I didn't have a lot of the emotional parts, right? And so I think attachment parenting really talks about, all those physical things we can do, baby wearing, bed sharing, breastfeeding, all these things, feeding with love, if not breastfeeding. But, my work is going further to talk a lot more about the emotional parts as well.
Yeah.
Um, and so many of us had that rejected as kids, right? Like our stress, our anger, our sadness, these difficult emotions were silenced, rejected. We were isolated for them, right?
Yeah.
Many of us were given that idea, we love you when you're happy, you're accepted when you're happy, but the other stuff, no thanks,
Yeah, go to
right?
your room and come out when you can be nice or come out when you can behave,
Yeah,
that kind of thing. And
yeah,
it creates a lot of anxiety, and in the work that I do, I end up working ultimately a lot with adults who are dealing with those attachment issues later, and it's coming out in
yeah,
our adult relationship patterns, in our romantic relationships.
yeah,
And so having a child for me has opened up my heart to the work that I do in a new way too, because every person that enters one of my containers, I just see a little bit of my daughter in them, and I have this
absolutely.
little tiny vulnerable infant in my arms all day, and I'm looking at her and I'm thinking, wow, like this is all of the people that I work with.
It
this is
is.
who they were. And it really does create this deeper sense of connection and empathy. So I've actually felt more inspired by my work since becoming a mom, even though I have way less time to do it.
Yeah. Oh my God. I completely see that. Yeah. It is amazing. I always say that inside of all of us, there is that infant brain still in there, right? Like that's our emotional system and how it was built. And this nurtured work, this nurtured parenting is preventative medicine,
Mm.
right? When we can provide it for our babies, we are really helping them have resilience and avoiding a lot of, the mental health struggles that we all experience, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was reading in your book how first there's a few things that I really want to touch on before we finish this interview. And one of them is the whole infancy lasting 3 years thing. Now, this is something that I am aware of, but I think a lot of people don't fully realize that
Mhm.
infancy is actually 3 years,
Yep.
especially the things that I hear about breastfeeding. Like, well, if they're old enough to walk and talk, they're old enough to
Mhm.
drink a cup or whatever, but they're still a
Yep.
baby. And then also the brain not being fully developed until 25 years. I think it's
Mhm.
important to touch on that as well. And
Yeah.
but before we do that, I want to kind of go back to what you're referencing now, which is how protective nurturance can be against mental health challenges, against depression, against all sorts of different chronic illnesses as adults. So
Mhm.
let's dive into that a little bit. What does nurturance actually look like? If you were to give a mother a roadmap, here's how to nurture your baby for the next 3 years. What are like the top 5 things you would say to do every day?
Yeah, it's a great question. Before I answer, I also want to acknowledge, right? So many of us, not all of us, are probably weren't nurtured this way as babies,
Yeah.
right? So we're asking this generation of parents for the first time ever. We're the first generation that has this benefit of the genetic revolution and neuroscience revolution of the past 30 years of information to really, do this in a new way.
Absolutely.
And we're asking people to do it without having had that experience
Hmm.
themselves,
Yeah.
right? So like so much compassion for us. We are all doing our best. And that's it. It's an intention. It's not something strict. It is not, you know, prescriptive, right? It's a way that we're all trying. So yeah, what were the best ways? So I'll start in pregnancy, right? Because we can start some of the stuff in pregnancy. Um, I think in pregnancy, having ways of having some self-awareness for our stress and ways of managing our stress can be so helpful.
Yeah.
I share in my book, I did have a very, very stressful pregnancy and birth. And I was also doing mindfulness. I was listening to guided mindfulness recordings every day, doing as much gentle movement as I could, things like that. So I think that number one thing is for pregnant people to know you are special.
Hmm.
Um, the message in our world is pretend like you're not pregnant, work like you did before,
Yeah.
socialize like you did before, do everything the way you did before. And I'm sort of here to say, you're special. That's not true. Like, do everything different to really be taking really good care of yourself. In terms of, making yourself feel good, managing your stress, all of that kind of stuff is really important.
Hmm.
Um, Having uninterrupted time after your baby's born is so important
That
as
postpartum
well.
period, right? That
Yes,
first 40 days kind of.
exactly. Yes. Um, and so, we're also kind of in a culture where we have like people rushing into the birthing room and parents not kind of having that time to meet their baby and all this kind of stuff across those first 40 days, right? Knowing like lots of things can happen. Maybe it's not going to happen the second the baby's born, but you do have weeks and months,
Hmm.
right? Um, so, for parents of new babies, like making that time really slow, spending lots of time, parents and baby, just lying around in bed, getting to know each other, communicating, knowing babies can communicate right away.
Yeah.
It's very important for people to know, because that's not widely known, I don't think. And then in the infant years, understanding, growing that presence of yours, to be as emotionally accepting as possible, connecting with your baby a couple times a day, learning how your baby's stress is supported.
Mm,
Very, very important. And that also includes inner work for us.
totally.
Um, and then figuring out sleep, right? Figuring out a way that we can support our baby's
Mm,
sleep, um, in a way that's responsive too.
yeah,
Those are the big ones.
those are great.
Yeah.
Sleep has been an interesting one for me. But I want to return back to one of the things that you said when you were listing this off, and you said the communication piece, that babies can communicate right away.
Mm,
And how would you help somebody who isn't aware that babies can communicate right away
yeah,
recognize the cues? What does that look like
for
in the
sure.
first 15 days, let's say?
Yeah, absolutely. Even in in birthing rooms, right? I'll orient to parents to that right away. So babies can see pretty much the distance. Like if you cradle them in your arm here, they can just sort of see that distance to your face.
And in black and white, right? Like they can't even see
Mhm.
color.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
wild.
It's yes, they can kind of see contrast. So I mean, the most amazing thing is that babies can be born and connect with us
Mhm.
even without us, right? So we're designed so that if you gave birth, if you were unconscious, right, for some reason out in the wild, a
Mhm.
baby could be born on their own, and then through their sight and smell, they can find their way up your chest
Mhm.
to your breast and latch on, right? It's incredible. And then they're orienting to what our face looks like, our smell, the sound of our voice, the sound of our heartbeat, our breathing. And so to help parents with that right away, I'll say, hold your baby in that place, like
Mhm.
let them find you, right? We don't have to like search for our baby's gaze. Some people do. We can kind of just, you know, focus on our breath, watch the baby will orient to you. And then you can start making some faces with the baby. You can stick out your tongue, give the baby a few seconds, and they'll imitate your face and
Mhm.
they'll do it back. Um, you can start, talking to them, noticing them, just taking them in with your senses. Like, your eyes are so shiny and bright,
Mhm.
your skin's so soft, right? Your hair is so soft. And sort of just seeing how they respond and kind of going back and forth with them that way.
Mhm.
They do it right instantly from birth. It's
Mhm.
incredible.
You're so precious. You're making me want to have another baby. No.
Yeah,
It's a really special time.
they are special.
Yeah, they're little presencing beings. I always say, my daughter is teaching me so much about presence, because it's really easy to lose ourselves and want to be doing all of the other things, or we're missing out on stuff, or nap trapped. And for me,
Mhm.
the most spiritual journey of motherhood so far has just been to practice presence and really just fully surrender to the moment and being with her. Uh,
Yes.
and sleep, on the note of sleep, that's been a big one for us, because until she was 7 months, she wouldn't sleep unless she was on me, and even all night long. And so,
Yeah.
I ended up having to sleep halfway sitting up. She had reflux for the first few months. And so I slept sitting up, propped, with her on my chest.
Mhm.
And we ended up getting into quite a good rhythm where after the 3-month mark, she started sleeping through the night. She wouldn't nurse until 5 a.m. So we
Wow.
would get 6 or 7 hours of sleep straight. Now, of course, that's over. We're doing the whole progression thing where
Yes.
she's learning how to crawl and climb, and she wants to walk. So it's just party time now.
Mhm.
But we sleep together, we co-sleep, and she's a very high contact baby, like nurse to sleep for every sleep, every nap,
Yep.
and she's only just starting to relax where I can put her down and sneak out for a little bit while she's sleeping. That's only been maybe a month now. But it was really cool for me to see that it just kind of happened on its own and I didn't have to do anything and I could just be
Yeah.
with her in those moments. And a lot of parents are told that if they don't sleep train, which is one of your myths in here as well, that if a baby goes through a regression and then they don't sleep train, that it's going to be like that forever. And
Mhm.
I was reading when she went through her first regression. We were fortunate. We skipped the 4-month regression. We didn't have any, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And then around 7 months, something shifted. And I was like, okay, here we go. This is great. Her brain is changing. I like to call them progressions instead of
Yep.
regressions. And so I just, of course, did some Googling, is the
Yep.
best idea
Right.
ever. And some very well known parenting blog, I kid you not, it said, if your baby can sleep independently and self soothe themselves back to sleep, then the regression will go away in a few weeks to a month. But if your baby needs soothing from you to go back to sleep, this regression is here to stay forever. So essentially, it said if your baby hasn't turned into a mature adult by the time they're 4 or 6 months,
Mhm.
you're screwed. And I
Yeah.
was like,
That's a total
what?
lie.
This is not a small parenting blog. Like, I'm not going to call out I did send them an email though. I was like, this is
Yeah.
messed up. You guys should not be
Yeah.
sharing this type of false information with so
Yes.
many vulnerable parents. But that's what it said. And I knew that that wasn't true. But
Mhm.
I was thinking about all of the first time parents who maybe haven't spent their lives, nerding out on this stuff. They're not
Yeah.
going to know that. And they're going to
Yeah.
think, oh my gosh, if I don't sleep train, I'll never sleep again.
Yes, absolutely. It's so dangerous. It's so, so dangerous. It is amazing how many people are still sharing that information. And even for well-informed parents, that can shake you, right? That
Mhm.
can be like, oh my gosh, really? Like maybe this other stuff is true, right? Um, I always kind of help parents work through it with tracing back, like whose voice is that? Like who said that,
Yeah.
right? So in that case, I'd be like, where does this come from? What are the references for this, right? And if you did trace that back, it's baseless.
Yeah.
It's completely made up, and it is so harmful, right? It's so harmful for people who would make the decision to be supporting their baby,
Mhm.
but of course want to do the best for their baby's health. And if a blog's saying like this is the only way they're ever going to sleep, it's they need it for their brain to grow properly, right? All these kinds of things are said in this area. That is going to really, really be harmful, right? For
Mhm.
many, many parents. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it kind of blew my mind. I was shocked that that is the kind of information that's still being put out. And it's
Yeah.
obviously scary. There's a lot of parents, they have to wake up and go to work in the morning, and they're doing
Yeah.
their very best to nurture their children through the night. And the idea that what they're doing is somehow damaging, even though it's the absolute best thing that they could be offering, can imagine would
Yes.
just be really nerve-wracking for parents. And
For sure. And it's really unfortunate as well because a lot of those, if they're called, regressions, progressions, you know, times of intense brain development, I would say,
yeah,
where there are more night wakings, they are they come and go, right? They
yeah.
last a week or two. Sometimes they do last, 3, 4 weeks. That's possible as well, on the long end, but they pass,
Mhm.
right? And so it really is. I want parents out there to know you never have to use sleep training.
Yeah.
Babies do, like as you shared your story, that is so common for babies to need that contact for those first few months and to take up until 7, 8, 9, or even 10 months to sleep independently, even for a nap.
Hmm.
Um, it's incredibly common. Like hundreds of babies I worked with, exactly like this, and there's so
Yes.
little support, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so so for parents to know that the sleep, it develops, right? It fully develops. I've worked with so many parents, and I have my own son, and it worked that way for us too.
At first, I mean, I never crossed my mind to do any sleep training, but at first I was surprised that it was shifting because, in the first couple of weeks when she was just a little potato sack, I could put her down for a little bit in the living room on the floor. And we had this little like snuggle me or something, and I'd
Yeah,
put her
yeah,
in
those
there and
are
I'd go wander around and, uh, you know, and then all of a sudden it just shifted and she was like, no, you will hold me for every single nap. And I
hmm
would even try, excuse me, I would try every once in a while. I would, see if I could put her down and instantly awake, just screaming.
Yep.
So I just stopped doing that. And so for much of her earliest infancy, I was living within these like 1.5 hour windows. Like I would just, whoa, I have an hour and a half. Like, what do I need to get done? Do I need to eat? Do I need to shower? Like
Mhm.
anything. And then back into bed.
Yeah.
Uh, but the gift of that was that I had to rest. And
Yes.
so in a way, I see it as this really deep natural intelligence that's built in, because if we are not nap trapped and if we are
Mhm.
not holding our babies, then we're probably too busy for where we should actually be, given that we've just created and birthed a human and it takes a long time to recover from that. It's not just a 3-month postpartum period. And so in a way, I was just really grateful for that gift, and grateful for the opportunity to be so present with my baby, because not everybody has that option.
Yeah.
But it was really special to watch her just totally relax as soon as she was in my arms and we were skin to skin. Um, and then one day we went on a trip and we were in a hotel room and I didn't have the proper setup to sleep with her on me in that space. It
Mhm.
wasn't safe the way that the pillows were. And so I was like, okay, I'm just gonna see. I'm just gonna put her next to me. And I did, and boom, she just went to sleep. And Ben and I just looked at each other like, what is going on right now? And then we get to
Let's move into
California
this hotel.
and she all of a sudden just overnight, just all of her naps, she started sleeping. And now, things are shifting. She needs a lot of contact. We still do a lot of contact napping, but
Yeah.
it was just wild to see it just go from no to yes overnight. And I did nothing. It was she decided. And
Yep.
so,
They
letting
felt
our
safe.
babies lead the way can be really special, to just let them decide
Mhm.
when they're ready.
Completely. Completely. I think the higher the babies who are more sensitive, like your baby, my son was exactly the same. It took about 10 months for him to be able to sleep on his own.
Yeah.
Um, it is a benefit for them and for us, right?
Mm.
When we're close to them, with those contact naps and sleeping close at night, that's, we're both getting safety signals from each other. And so we're transforming our baby's brain, we're transforming their emotional, the emotional parts of their brain towards health, and ours too. Because as parents, we get a new window of neuroplasticity to sort of um, reshape some of those brain areas that were formed in our infancy,
Mm.
right? So it's very healing for
Mm.
us and
Yeah.
very transformative to grow our baby's brain. And so I think those babies and parents are the luckiest, even though it is challenging.
Yeah.
Um, so even babies who don't need it still really benefit from it.
Mm.
And it's important for parents to know that too. And that slowing down that you talked about, so important.
It's interesting that you say that it can heal us. Tell me a little bit more about that when you say we
Mhm.
get this new window of neuroplasticity as parents.
Yeah, it's really incredible. I didn't quite realize how astonishing it was until I wrote it out in my book because I had been teaching it, but I just didn't, the puzzle pieces didn't fit together. But, you know, we have 3 windows of time where our emotional systems become much more flexible, right? We call that neuroplasticity, where the neurons in our brain can form new connections in a much more quicker, easier way. So the first is infancy, those first 3 years, where our brain's really just being built.
Mhm.
1 million connections per second. Incredible. The second window is adolescence. Our emotional systems get reshaped again then. I don't know too much about that yet. That might be my next area of interest because it's fascinating. And then the last one is when we become parents.
Okay.
Yes, incredible. So for mothers and people who are pregnant with babies, that happens while the baby's gestating, right? When babies are inside of us. For parents who didn't birth the baby in, all types of situations, um, that process happens over the first few weeks, right? The
Mm.
first what's around 14 or 16 weeks,
Yeah.
right? And so the more time we spend in the presence of our baby, touching them, smelling them, cuddling them, feeding them, all these things, the more our brains transform as
Mm.
parents. And so the brain areas that transform in us are overlap almost completely with the ones that are formed in infancy.
Awesome.
So our amygdala, our fear centers become plastic again. Our hippocampus, that also is part of our stress system and our memory systems, that becomes plastic. Our prefrontal cortex as well, which also is involved in stress regulation, thinking, planning. And then in parents, a different part than babies, which is the insula. And that part of our brain is a part of our brain that's involved in empathy
Mm.
and intuition.
Ah.
So we become really, really open to getting those areas transformed. That's where healing can happen, right? Especially if we had those areas programmed by a more adverse kind of experience in infancy. They can be programmed again. And also we get these superpowers to take care of our baby and tune into our baby. So it's like this feedback loop, right? We can hear them better, respond to them better, be more empathetic, and then we are with them more, and then it happens more.
I so resonate with that. I really felt the final layer of healing for myself, for my own protective mechanisms. For those who don't know my childhood, I grew up in and out of foster homes, and I was out on my own very early. And there's a lot of abandonment and abuse in my early childhood, actually, throughout my whole early until I was 20. My life was a chaotic mess. And so I've spent a lot of years healing from those things and really learning how to be safe in relationship and also learning how to let love in. And this year for my birthday, was the first year that I ever planned my own birthday. I've always sort of tried to evade it a little bit. And this year, months ahead, I was inviting everybody and I had this huge bash at my house and bash, like we had a daytime party.
Yeah.
And we had this circle. We do these birthday circles where everybody gives us a few minutes of love and they look you in the eyes and they tell you all the things that they love about you. And a few of the women who live on our land, they sang me a song, and in that moment, I was crying and I noticed I wanted to put my head down and kind of tuck in. And I just opened and I just looked at the eyes of everybody, just took in the kind eyes and the warmth of the room around me. And I really just let it in. And I could feel that I was more open than I ever have been. And I've
Yeah.
done a lot of healing, but it was like, oh, that final layer has melted away. And I knew, I was like, this is because I'm a mother. This is because of my daughter. And so it was just so special to experience that. And it's really cool to hear you say that because I think so many parents are afraid, like I've got to do all my healing work before or I'm going to mess my kid up. But really, it sounds like it's a very symbiotic thing where, we're healing each other.
Completely. Thank you for sharing that. It's
Mm.
so beautiful. I think I've also experienced so much healing in the relationship, and so much of it is that it's probably the first like secure relationship I've
Yeah.
had, right?
Like from day one.
Yeah, from day one, like
Yeah.
my son fully expresses his emotions as most babies
Yeah.
and toddlers do. They're just like, I'm mad, I'm gonna let everyone know. I'm sad, I'm feeling it.
Yeah.
And that's, I've been able to do that for him too. I share my emotions with him without any, masking or, any defenses or protectiveness up as well. And so, yeah, there's a lot of nuance to it, but it's an incredibly healing
Yeah.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Really, really powerful and wonderful for everybody who is listening to know that that's happening, you know.
Yeah. And actually what you said is one of the myths in the book too.
Mhm.
Because I heard that from so many parents I worked with, that I have so much work to do before I can have a baby, and
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
don't,
Yeah.
right?
The work never ends.
Yeah.
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 And there's sort of there's, there's a line. I say that too with people who ask me, like, well, I'm not ready to be in a relationship. I'm like, well, if you're at rock bottom right now, then yeah, you're not ready to be in a relationship. But if it's just that you have some work to do, Well, don't we all? That's never going to end. And, you know,
Yeah.
it's the same, I think, when you enter into a romantic relationship, you've done all this work and then you meet a person and now it's all, you have all this new stuff, all this new content.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that with a kid. You know, you have it all figured out. Your relationship's solid, you're ready to go. And then you bring a child in, you're like, oh no, now we're at the beginning again. What do we do? Right? There's all of this new content to work with.
For
And that's
sure.
growth. All of these big experiences, big life changes bring new opportunities for us to meet ourselves in those hard to meet places. And Ben and I have definitely experienced that, you know, having to shift and grow and find new ways to connect.
Yeah, for sure. And
Yeah.
it's a metamorphosis too for us, right? As becoming parents, right? Through all those brain changes that we have and identity shifts and the freedom, the access to
Yeah.
freedom and
What is
all this.
freedom?
Exactly.
What is this freedom you speak of?
Like, for me, it started coming back, you know, by about 4 years postpartum.
So like a few months ago? Oh no, oh, 4 months
Yes.
postpartum, 4 years
Oh,
postpartum.
years, years,
Yeah.
years. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
that's real, right? And
Yeah.
and that's because that the first 3 years, you know, they are infants, as you said. And
Mhm.
um I hear a lot from people, especially around the whole toddler thing. You know, we hear like, oh, the terrible twos, or, you know, once they turn
Mhm.
into toddlers, they, you know, they become little jerks. Like people say all sorts of things about toddlers that
Yes.
it's just so damaging, when you think like, oh, it's just a little baby. And I want to pull up something in your book that I showed Ben the other day when I was in the morning. I was prepping for this interview, and I said, "Look at this, Ben." And I showed him this figure, and I said, "This is the kind of brain that people are expecting adult
Mhm.
behavior from." I said, "Isn't that funny? You know, look at
Yes.
this 3-year-old." He said, "That looks like chaos." And I said, "Well, imagine what it feels like to be in that brain
Yes.
at 3. You know, what does it feel like to be experiencing so much at once?" And so that's our job, to learn to teach these little beings, you know, how to just be safe in their bodies and how to regulate. And that takes a
Yeah.
lifetime. And one of the myths you talk about is that babies can self-soothe. Like we hear that all the time, like, oh, they need to learn
Mhm.
how to self-soothe. But I didn't even learn how to self-soothe until I was like 28.
I'm
So,
still learning. Yeah, I didn't start learning until I was about 30. And I think it's an ongoing process for so many of us, right? Especially if we didn't have that guidance, and emotional modeling and teaching when we were little. So it's a new experience for our babies for sure. Yeah, and those kind of phrases like terrible twos, and so on. There's so many. Um, that it hurts me to hear them because like we are talking about these like vulnerable little babies. And it also is just a big reflection of how, how hurt we've all been. We're so wounded,
yeah,
right? To be calling babies names like this.
yeah,
And it also shows the wounds we have to be so uncomfortable with another human experiencing big emotions and big stress,
yeah,
right? And so we have to name call to, resolve that for ourselves,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, and we have this expectation that they'll be able to just learn how to do these things, but it's a co-creative process where we're helping them regulate with our touch and our presence, and then they're soothing through it. But I've also experienced when especially in the very beginning, but still now, you know, if she's really upset about something, I start to get activated because I'm stressed that she's stressed. And so
Mhm.
I'm actively working on regulating my system so that I can be there for her to hold space. But
Yeah.
as if we start nursing or if I'm cuddling her, I can actually feel my hormones start to flood. And then we start nursing, and then 15 minutes in, I'm feeling blissful, she's asleep or whatever, you know, and I just realized this idea that it's just our job to regulate them, it feels a little bit one-sided, but in my reality, it's been a two-way street where I'm taking the lead. I'm the one responsible for holding the container. But
Mhm.
actually, when she is soothing, I'm also being soothed through that relationship. through that
Yes.
touch and through that nursing. And so that is also something to remember too, is that when we are holding space for them, we're also holding space for ourselves to experience that calm and that peace.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that understanding that and feeling, like we are knowledgeable about it and able to do it, like that's the hardest part of parenting. That's the hardest, yeah, that's the meat of it. Like that's you know, the thing that we should all be learning about.
Mhm.
Uh, Figuring out how, what does it feel like when we're activated, knowing how to, regulate ourselves, you know, often at the same time as with our baby. Um, but they need us to be in that state. Like we're not going to be able to help them regulate or build that self-regulation, or what people would call self-soothing, over time, unless, we can look at ourselves as well. It's such an important piece.
And so if babies don't get that, if they don't get that nurturance, let's say they have a parent who is just very emotionally unavailable in all ways. They didn't really
Mhm.
get a lot of touch. They probably didn't get co-sleeping. They didn't get emotional resonance,
Yeah.
any sort of, empathy for emotions. Uh, how does that show up later as adults?
It's a really good question. Because I think we're living in a world where most people did not.
Mhm.
And what does it do? It increases the chances of a person's emotional brain to grow to be what I would call more reactive,
Yeah.
right? So you know, they're perceiving more things in the world as threatening and fearful,
Mhm.
more things inside themselves as threatening and fearful. They have bigger stress responses, longer stress responses, and not be able to regulate that very well, right? And so, what do we do in a reactive brain? We get very sick, suppresses our immune system, it influences our sleep, it leads to every illness we can imagine physically.
Mhm.
Um, it impacts our mental health, increases chances of anxiety, depression, addiction, relationship struggles, all of the thoughts and experiences that impact us negatively mentally.
Yeah.
And then leads to more of these behaviors that are like aggressive behaviors, fear driven behaviors, right? That we see. And when we look at our world, people with these more reactive brains that are creating all the systems in our world, and
Yeah.
they're involved everywhere, right? And so I do see this movement towards nurtured parenting as a way of really healing so many systems, for the future.
Amen. Me too. And that's why I love following your work and I really respect everything that you're doing. And I love that you call it the nurture revolution because I feel like our missions are similar in just a different category. Like I'm working with the adults in that space, but you're working with the parents in this very tender time and educating on such an important aspect, which is that how we nurture our babies is nurturing our entire future. And, what could be more important than supporting and nourishing and nurturing these little humans who are then going to be responsible for shaping the world that we live in?
Yes.
And I think that that's so, so important. And the whole family unit has kind of lost the center of attention. We don't value family as much as we used to. And of course, there's so much about the past that we don't want to bring back, right? Like we're in many ways, we're in much better shape. But in
Mm.
that one way, I find where we don't emphasize the importance of the family unit anymore, I think that's something that we need to really look at and rebuild because it's everything.
Yeah.
It's everything. I'm curious, I have one more question for you. And this is something that I've been sort of observing and processing as I am a mother now. And I want to know your thoughts on it. Something that there's a lot of debate on, and which I'm sure you would know more about, is that, either we're born with our personalities, or they're shaped. It's sort of that nurture versus nature debate.
Mhm.
What I've experienced in my very early experience as a mom. I don't have a ton of experience yet, but it
Yeah.
seems to me that we're all kind of born with an essence. We're born with that who we are personality. And
Mhm.
as a parent, we have the capacity to either preserve it through our nurturance and through our love and to help guide it in a good way, or we can create adaptive mechanisms when we don't nurture. So it's almost as though, we have two different directions we could go. If we have, I think I saw in your book, if you have a propensity toward perhaps having addiction or having a mental illness, if you're nurtured, you could actually, if you nurture your kid, you could steer them away from that. But if you don't, then that will activate. Would you say that that's kind of true? Is that like we're just here to sort of preserve the essence? Or can we actually give them their personality by how we nurture them?
Yeah, I think that that's more in the realm of psychology, but I do agree, right? So I think I write so much more of like neurobiology, stress, yeah, that kind of world. But I do completely agree, right? I think that if we have an authentic self, which is, it actually does overlap with quite a few parts of the book, which is when we feel something, we want to authentically feel it, and we want the people around us, to be able to handle it,
Yeah.
right? To be able to support it or be there for us.
Mm-hmm.
Same with the stress, right? And so when we can be authentic that way, we really are being our true selves, right? And that makes up our personality, right? How reactive is our stress system? How, all the other, parts of temperament, right? Like,
Yeah.
do we like to dive into a new situation or take time to warm up, right? There's all different parts of personality and temperament. And when we're fully accepting of the baby and their emotions and stress and their needs, I would say, yes, I do agree. I think that they would then grow up to know their authentic self and be able to express their authentic self to the world. If we're, returning to the beginning of our conversation, if we're rejecting, parts of their personality and stress and temperament and telling them, no, we don't like that part, hide that part, people aren't going to love you if you do this around them, then they are going to create defenses and protections to survive, because, as babies, we need to have the love and protection of the people around us.
Mm-hmm.
And so, under those circumstances, our authentic self would be buried underneath a lot of those protective mechanisms, defenses. And that's so much of the healing that we do as adults, right? Is to learn that programming and try to be able to express our authentic self as much as we can.
Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to find that spot in your book, but you probably remember it's the two types of brains, and it's the one where you're either really sensitive or you're not sensitive. So we might as well nurture
Yes.
everybody. What were those two types that you?
Yes, the orchid and dandelion.
Yes, the orchid and the dandelion. I loved that because it's so true. You said, a dandelion can survive in any environment. And an orchid obviously cannot. Anyone who's had an orchid knows this. They're very, very difficult to take care of.
Yep.
But you said that the research isn't totally clear yet on how to tell if you have an orchid or a dandelion baby. And so we should
Yeah,
all just nurture our babies as if they're orchids.
completely. And so there's orchid and dandelion genes that I talked about.
Yeah.
And then there's also orchid and dandelion children that people talk about in the realm of like highly sensitive children and things like that. So for the genes, they're actually these specific genes that are incredibly sensitive to this early caregiving experience that some people have and others don't.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's right. Like, we're not doing genetic profiles of our babies, right? They might not have, what we would call an orchid type personality. They might not be highly reactive. They might not, need all that, lots of touch and lots of regulation. They might look like a very, easygoing type child, but still need that nurturing in order for those genes to be protective for their mental health.
And so you talk about how if a baby has those orchid genes, which makes them highly sensitive, that lack of nurturance is what could lead to those other illnesses, the chronic conditions, the mental illness, more likely to feel depressed, etc.
Yeah, really increase the risk, right? So for all of that stuff, nothing's deterministic for sure.
Yeah.
But it does increase risk. And it is largely because of those, some people really have those really, really sensitive genes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And well, the good news is that for those of us who have the opportunity to nurture our babies in this way, through becoming parents, we're healing ourselves. So it's a gift. It's an opportunity for us to experience that healing as well, and for us to
Mhm.
experience what it looks like inside of a healthy, secure relationship, possibly for the first time, which is
Yes, for
something
sure.
that I'm doing now as a mother. I'm getting to see what it's like inside of a healthy family with a father and all of these things that I didn't have. So there's just a lot of healing to be had when we take this path. So
Yeah,
thank you so
absolutely.
much for writing this book. I'm very excited to get through it one day.
One
Um,
day.
no, it's a wonderful book. My husband and I, we just spend a couple minutes every morning, and I highlight a few things and share them, and we talk about it. And we're going to keep doing that with this book. And I would love to interview you again. And this is just, there's so much we could talk about here, and I hope that this book lands in as many hands as possible. Very
Awesome.
beautiful.
Thank you so much. I'd love to talk to you again anytime.
Yeah, thanks so much. And so people can find the link for your book in the show notes here. But I want to remind everybody that the Nurture Revolution is available. It's for pre-order at the moment.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's going to be released next week.
Yeah.
So very soon.
Yay. I'm so excited for you. Thank you again for your time, for everything that you've shared with us. And I really look forward to seeing this book take a life of its own in the world.
Thank you. Lovely to be with you.